All right, let's dive into Kotak Mahindra Bank's latest financials. They just released their Q3 FY25 results. And, well, we're going deeper than just the headlines here. We've got all the official stuff, press releases, investor presentations. Plus, we've got some really interesting questions from analysts. These questions are going to help us focus on what really
Yeah,
matters.
those raw numbers only tell you so much.
Exactly. And honestly, the first thing that just jumps out at me is the size of these numbers. Like, Kotak Mahindra's consolidated profit after tax, Peter, it shot up by 10%. That's 4,701 crore.
Wow.
Then you've got return on equity, super healthy at 12.43%. Book value per share up a whopping 23%. It's almost mind-blowing.
It does paint a pretty rosy picture, doesn't it? But the real question is, what's driving all this growth? Is it coming from the bank itself, or are the subsidiaries playing a big role?
That's a great question. Especially because if you look at the investor presentation, some of those subsidiaries are posting some pretty amazing numbers. Take Kotak Mahindra Capital, for example. Their PPT skyrocketed like 170% year on year. And Kotak AMC, they're not slouching either. 73% PP jump and a 51% increase in equity assets under management. So what's the story here? What does this tell us about their overall strategy?
Well, those numbers definitely suggest they're not putting all their eggs in one basket, right? They're not just relying on traditional banking. Kotak Mahindra Capital, that's their investment banking arm, and that success shows they're attracting some big clients, doing a lot of deals. Then you've got Kotak AMC, the asset management company. Their growth tells me they're tapping into India's growing investor base.
So they're making some savvy moves beyond just lending money. Now, looking at some of these analyst questions, I'm seeing a lot of interest in how the overall economic climate is affecting the bank. They're asking about things like interest rates and inflation.
Makes sense. That's always a big factor for any financial institution. And the press release does mention their net interest margin. It's 4.93% for the quarter.
NM, right?
Exactly. Think of it like this. INM is the profit margin for a bank. It's the difference between what they earn on loans and what they pay out on deposits. So, it's very sensitive to any changes in interest rates by the Reserve Bank of India. Higher interest rates can be good for NIM, but only up to a point. Because if borrowing gets too expensive, then loan demand goes down.
Right, so it's a balancing act. And I guess inflation plays a role in that too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. High inflation, well, it eats away at people's purchasing power. They're less likely to take out loans, which then impacts the bank's lending business. And of course, high inflation might force the Reserve Bank of India to hike interest rates even further. It creates kind of ripple effect.
So even though Kotak Mahindra is posting these fantastic numbers, it sounds like they're operating in a pretty unpredictable environment. What about internally? Are they managing their costs well?
Well, that's crucial for any business, especially in a competitive market like banking. Now, if you dig into their financial statements, you can see how they're breaking down their expenses. And it's clear they're focusing on efficiency.
Yeah.
Employee costs, for example, those have been pretty stable. But they've been strategically managing other operating expenses.
So they're keeping a tight leash on spending. But what about the big picture? What about their overall financial health, like their capital adequacy ratio and liquidity? I got to be honest, those terms always sound a bit intimidating to me.
Haha. Well, think of the capital adequacy ratio as the bank's safety net. It measures their capital reserves against their risk-weighted assets. Basically, the higher the ratio, the bigger the cushion they have to absorb potential losses. It's all about resilience in tough times. And Kotak Mahindra has a really healthy ratio, so they're prepared for whatever financial storms might come their way.
Okay, that's good to know. And what about liquidity? Is that basically how easy it is for them to access cash when they need it?
Exactly. Liquidity is vital for a bank to meet its short-term obligations, handle any unexpected demands for cash. A good liquidity position means they can manage withdrawals, fund loans, and meet their commitments without running into trouble.
So they're playing it safe, being financially responsible. But, what does all this mean for the average person, for someone who isn't a financial expert?
That's the key question, right? Because at the end of the day, a bank's success depends on how well it serves its customers. And Kotak Mahindra has a huge customer base. We're talking 5.2 crore people.
Wow, 5.2 crore. That's more than the population of many countries. How do they attract and keep so many customers? What are they doing that's resonating with people?
Well, their digital banking and fintech initiatives seem to be a big part of it. They're really focusing on making banking easy and accessible. Think mobile apps, online platforms, the whole works. It's all about creating a seamless customer experience.
So tech-savvy and customer-focused. But let's face it, when it comes to banks, there's always that question about asset quality lurking in the background. Are they making good loans? Are they keeping those non-performing assets under control?
You're hitting the nail on the head there. Their gross non-performing asset ratio, GNPA, it's at 1.50%. And the net NPA ratio is even lower, 0.41% for Q3 FY25. Now, these might just sound like numbers, but they're actually quite impressive, much lower than the industry average, and even better than their own performance last year.
So they are keeping those bad loans in check. How are they doing that?
Well, their provision coverage ratio gives us a clue. This tells us how prepared they are to deal with potential losses from those bad loans. It's like setting aside money for a rainy day, right?
Yeah.
The higher the coverage, the better protected they are. And Kotak Mahindra has a really solid ratio of 73%.
So they're not just throwing money around. They're being cautious and responsible. Now, some of these analyst questions are focusing on Kotak Mahindra's strategic moves. For example, they recently sold off a 70% stake in Kotak General Insurance. That seems a little counterintuitive given their overall growth. Is this a sign of weakness, or are they just shifting gears?
That divestment definitely raises some questions. On the surface, it looks like they're stepping back from the insurance business, but there might be a deeper strategy at play. Maybe they're streamlining their portfolio, focusing on their core strengths like retail and corporate banking. Plus, that deal brought in a lot of capital, which they could use to fuel other initiatives.
So they're playing the long game, making calculated moves. Speaking of strategic moves, they're also in the process of buying Standard Chartered Bank's personal loan book. What's the thinking there?
That's a bold move for sure. It suggests they see a lot of potential in the retail lending space, especially in unsecured loans. This acquisition could really boost their market share in that segment.
Interesting. But why focus on personal loans specifically? What's driving that decision?
Well, it's probably tied to India's growing middle class and the increasing popularity of digital lending platforms. They might see this as a prime opportunity to tap into a large and potentially very profitable market.
So they're not just playing defense with low MPAs, they're going on offense with acquisitions and strategic divestments. It's like a financial chess match. But one thing that keeps popping up in all these documents is the constant mention of RBI guidelines and regulations. It seems like everything they do is heavily influenced by the Reserve Bank of India.
You've hit on a key point there. The RBI plays a huge role in shaping the Indian banking sector. Their focus on stability, transparency, and financial inclusion affects practically every decision Kotak Mahindra makes.
So it's not just about making profits, it's about operating within the framework set by the central bank. That's a pretty significant factor.
Absolutely. And it brings up an interesting question. How will the RBI's evolving regulatory approach shape the future of Indian banking? And what role will Kotak Mahindra play in this evolving landscape?
That is a great question, and one we'll definitely delve into further as we continue our deep dive.
Definitely lots more to uncover. We've only just scratched the surface.
So we've got Kotak Mahindra playing by the RBI's rules, but what does this mean for the average person's banking experience?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The RBI is all about financial inclusion, bringing banking services to those who traditionally haven't had access, people in rural areas, small businesses, you name it.
And how's Kotak Mahindra fitting into this? Are they just going through the motions, or are they really pushing for inclusivity?
They seem to be taking it seriously. Their branch network is huge, even reaching remote areas. Plus, they're using technology to make banking easier for everyone. Mobile apps, online platforms, the whole shebang.
So they're blending the old school approach with some serious tech savvy. Best of both worlds, right?
You got it. And it doesn't stop there. They're also offering products and services tailored for specific needs. Think microloans for small businesses or savings accounts with really low minimum balances.
So it's not just about providing access, it's about empowering people financially.
Exactly. And this points to a bigger trend. Financial institutions are realizing they have a role to play in driving positive social impact.
Not just making money, but making a difference. Okay, so we've talked about interest income, but what about those other revenue streams? The analysts were curious about non-interest income as well.
Right, that's an important piece of puzzle. Kotak Mahindra is mainly a lending institution, but they're smart enough to diversify their income sources. Fees and services, for example, brought in a cool UO 2,362 crore in Q3, up 10% year-on-year.
So fees and services are playing a significant role. What's driving that growth? Is it just those digital banking fees we talked about?
It's probably a mix of things. The digital platforms definitely generate revenue through service charges, but they're also active in wealth management, investment banking, and other areas that bring in fee-based income.
They're not putting all their eggs in one basket, are they? They're lending, providing financial services, managing assets, a real financial powerhouse.
Exactly. This diversification makes them more resilient. If one sector takes a hit, the others can help soften the blow.
Multiple safety nets. But speaking of safety nets, you mentioned earlier that Kotak Mahindra has a high capital adequacy ratio. That means they've got a strong cushion against potential losses. How does this fit into their overall risk management strategy? Are they being overly cautious, or are they striking the right balance?
That's the big debate in banking, isn't it? Some say too much caution stifles growth and innovation, but a high capital adequacy ratio is a sign of prudence, especially in these uncertain economic times.
So it's all about finding that balance. Cautious, but not so risk-averse that they miss out on opportunities.
Precisely. And from what we see in the reports, they seem to be hitting that sweet spot. Their conservative lending practices, reflected in those low NPA figures, suggest they're not taking unnecessary risks.
Responsible stewards of their depositors' money. But let's not forget about the competition. Who are the big players going head-to-head with Kotak Mahindra for market share?
It's a crowded field. You've got the public sector giants like SBI and Punjab National Bank. They're the heavyweights with vast networks and decades of history.
Size and legacy. But what about the private sector? Who are they battling it out with there?
Now that's where things get interesting. You've got HDFC Bank, ICICI Bank, Axis Bank, and of course Kotak Mahindra, all vying for a piece of the growing pie, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, their own strategies.
Like a financial royal rumble. And then you've got those fintech companies entering the ring too. They're shaking things up, aren't they?
Absolutely. Fintechs are quick, tech-savvy, offering new products and services. They appeal to a younger, digitally native generation. They're a force to be reckoned with.
So Kotak Mahindra is facing a multi-front battle. Traditional rivals, fintech disruptors, and the ever-present RBI. It's a high-stakes game.
It certainly is. Adaptability and innovation are key to survival, let alone success.
We've talked about their domestic operations, but they also have a global presence, right?
Yeah.
What's their international strategy? Dipping their toes in the water or diving headfirst?
Definitely making waves internationally. They've got subsidiaries and offices in several countries, the UK, the US, Singapore, Mauritius. They're using a mix of strategies. Part of it is serving the Indian diaspora, offering them familiar banking services.
So they're building on existing relationships.
Yeah,
But it's more than just serving Indians abroad, right?
right. They're also looking to tap into new markets and diversify their revenue streams. They offer specialized financial products like trade finance and wealth management to international clients.
Expanding their horizons, becoming a global player. Let's bring it back to India for a moment. We talked about the RBI's focus on financial inclusion. But what does that actually look like on the ground? What are the challenges and opportunities in bringing banking services to underserved populations?
It's a complex issue, for sure. Infrastructure is one challenge, reaching those remote areas where traditional banking services are scarce. Then there's financial literacy, educating people about banking products and services so they can make informed decisions.
It's not just about opening branches and launching apps. It's about building trust and understanding.
Exactly. But the potential rewards are huge. Bringing more people into the formal financial system can boost economic growth, reduce poverty, empower individuals.
A win-win situation. But it needs long-term commitment and understanding the needs of diverse communities.
Absolutely. And it's encouraging to see institutions like Kotak Mahindra stepping up to the plate.
Now, while we're on the topic of the bigger picture, let's zoom out even further. What about the global economic outlook? What are the key trends? What are the potential risks and opportunities for Kotak Mahindra in this global context?
Great question. We're seeing a shift in global economic power, with emerging markets like India taking center stage. This presents both opportunities and challenges for Kotak Mahindra.
Okay, break that down for me. What are those opportunities and challenges?
Well, India's booming economy is fertile ground for expansion and growth. There's a massive untapped market for financial services. But on the flip side, global headwinds like trade wars, geopolitical tensions, currency fluctuations, and rising interest rates can all impact their business.
So they need to be agile, adaptable, ready to navigate a complex global landscape?
Exactly. And that's where their diversified business model, strong leadership, and commitment to innovation really come into play.
Prepared for anything. But let's shift our focus back to the bank's inner workings. We've talked about their impressive financials and strategic moves, but what about the people behind the numbers? What's their leadership like? What's their vision for the future?
That's an aspect that often gets overlooked. A bank's success ultimately hinges on its people. And in Kotak Mahindra's case, their leadership team has a stellar track record. They've weathered numerous economic storms and consistently delivered strong results.
Experience and expertise. But what about their vision? Where do they see Kotak Mahindra going in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
Based on their recent moves and public statements, they seem to be aiming for a digitally driven, customer-centric financial powerhouse, embracing technology, expanding their reach, constantly innovating.
Not just adapting to change, but driving it.
Yeah.
That's ambitious, especially in such a dynamic and competitive environment.
It is, and their commitment to financial inclusion and sustainability suggests they're not just chasing profits, but aiming to make a positive impact.
It's inspiring to see a company with such a strong sense of purpose. But let's not forget the challenges. Every business has its vulnerabilities. What are the potential risks or pitfalls Kotak Mahindra needs to be aware of?
Right. No business is invincible. And for Kotak Mahindra, there are a few key areas to watch. One is that ever-present threat of a global economic slowdown. A recession in major economies could ripple outwards, impacting demand and potentially leading to more loan defaults.
So even though they're doing well domestically, they're not immune to global events.
Absolutely. They're part of a global system, and a downturn anywhere can spread quickly.
Sobering thought. Anything else on their radar?
The intensifying competition in the Indian banking sector is another factor.
Hmm.
They're feeling the heat from both traditional rivals and those nimble fintech startups we talked about.
A double-edged sword. Competition drives innovation, but it also puts pressure on them to adapt and evolve.
You got it. And the rapid pace of technological change just adds to that pressure. They need to be at the forefront of digital banking, always pushing the envelope.
No room for complacency. Stay ahead of the curve, both technologically and strategically. Any other potential pitfalls they need to be wary of?
Cybersecurity is a growing concern for everyone in finance. As they digitize their operations and store vast amounts of customer data, they become bigger targets for cyber attacks.
Yeah, constant cat and mouse game with hackers.
Exactly. And the stakes are high. A major data breach could damage their reputation, erode customer trust, lead to significant financial losses.
So cybersecurity is a core business risk, not just an IT issue.
Absolutely. It needs a comprehensive approach involving technology, processes, and people.
So we've got global economic uncertainty, intense competition, evolving regulations, and the constant threat of cyber attacks. Sounds like a tough environment.
It definitely has its challenges. But Kotak Mahindra is a well-managed, financially sound institution. They've proven their resilience time and time again.
They've weathered the storms before. But let's look ahead. What are the key trends that could shape Kotak Mahindra's journey in the years to come? What are the potential game changers?
The continued rise of digital banking is definitely a major trend. As technology advances and customer expectations change, they'll need to create even more seamless and secure digital experiences.
The digital revolution is far from over. What else is on the horizon?
Artificial intelligence and blockchain technology are two areas that could revolutionize the financial industry. AI could transform customer service and automate back-office processes, while blockchain could transform payments and security.
It sounds like we're on the verge of some major shifts.
We are, and Kotak Mahindra's ability to embrace and leverage these technologies will be crucial for their future success.
Agile, adaptable, and willing to experiment. But technology isn't the only factor shaping the future of banking. What about sustainability? We touched on this earlier, but it seems to be more than just a buzzword for Kotak Mahindra.
Absolutely. Sustainability is becoming a core value for businesses across the board, and banking is no exception. Investors, customers, and regulators are all demanding that banks take a more proactive approach to environmental and social issues.
It's not just about doing good. It's about doing good business.
Exactly. And Kotak Mahindra seems to get that. They've woven sustainability into their core values and are pursuing initiatives that align with this commitment.
Like what? Give us some concrete examples of their sustainability efforts.
They're investing in renewable energy projects, financing green buildings, and promoting financial literacy in rural communities. They're also working to reduce their own environmental footprint by using energy-efficient technologies and minimizing waste.
Walking the walk, not just talking the talk. But let's be realistic. Sustainability can be tricky for banks. They finance all sorts of projects, some of which might have negative environmental or social impacts. How do they reconcile that with their sustainability goals?
That's a valid point, and it's something they need to be transparent about. They can't just ignore projects that don't align with their sustainability principles, but they can engage with those companies, encourage them to adopt more sustainable practices, and use their influence to drive positive change.
so they can be a force for good, even within challenging sectors. It's about using their financial power responsibly.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance for sure.
Speaking of delicate balances, we talked about the RBI's influence on Kotak Mahindra, especially regarding financial inclusion. But this relationship also raises questions about the future of banking in India. If the RBI keeps tightening the reins, could it stifle innovation? Or will it lead to a more stable and resilient banking sector in the long run?
That's a hot topic in the industry. Some say too much regulation will hold back growth and make Indian banks less competitive globally. Others argue that a strong regulatory framework is essential for stability, especially in a rapidly evolving financial landscape.
It's a trade-off between fostering innovation and ensuring stability. But the end goal should be finding a balance that benefits both the banking sector and the people it serves.
Absolutely. And finding that balance requires open dialogue and collaboration between regulators, banks, and the public. It's an evolving process, and Kotak Mahindra will undoubtedly be a key player in shaping the future.
We've covered so much ground today. Kotak Mahindra's financials, strategies, competitive landscape, regulatory environment, global economic outlook, sustainability initiatives, even their corporate culture. But one thing we haven't touched on is corporate governance. How do they ensure ethical behavior and responsible decision-making throughout the organization?
That's vital for any successful company, especially in finance. And from what I've seen, Kotak Mahindra takes corporate governance very seriously. Their board of directors has independent members who provide oversight and ensure accountability.
Checks and balances to prevent conflicts of interest or unethical behavior.
Right. They also have a comprehensive code of conduct outlining the ethical principles that guide their operations. It covers everything from anti-bribery and corruption to data privacy and environmental responsibility.
So they're not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. But how do they make sure these principles are actually followed? Is it just about having a code of conduct or are there mechanisms to enforce it?
They have a dedicated compliance team that monitors and enforces those ethical standards. They also have whistleblower protection policies, encouraging employees to report any potential violations without fear of retaliation.
So they're proactive about promoting ethical behavior and holding everyone accountable? That's good to know.
Definitely. It shows their commitment to building a sustainable and responsible business.
This conversation has been so insightful. We've gone way beyond just the numbers and gained a deeper understanding of Kotak Mahindra Bank. But one thing that keeps sticking with me is this tension between stability and innovation. They need to be prudent and risk-averse to stay financially stable, but also bold and innovative to compete in a world that's changing so fast. How do they reconcile those two seemingly opposing forces?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's no easy answer. It's about finding a dynamic equilibrium, constantly adjusting and adapting as the landscape shifts.
Being both the tortoise and the hare. Slow and steady wins the race, but you also need to be quick and agile.
Exactly, and Kotak Mahindra seems to be doing a good job of navigating that challenge. They're maintaining a strong financial base while pushing the boundaries of innovation.
Impressive. But let's not forget about the human element. Behind all the financial strategies and technologies, there are people, customers, employees, communities. How does Kotak Mahindra view its role within this larger social ecosystem?
That's an important perspective, and it seems they recognize that their success is tied to the well-being of their stakeholders. Their focus on financial inclusion, sustainability, and ethical behavior suggests they're not just a profit-seeking machine, they're striving to make a positive impact on the world.
It's great to see a company that takes that responsibility seriously, but let's focus on a specific area that's generating a lot of buzz: artificial intelligence. How is Kotak Mahindra incorporating AI into their operations? Is it just hype, or is it really changing how they do business?
AI is more than just a buzzword for them. It's a core part of their digital transformation strategy. They're using it to improve customer experiences, boost operational efficiency, and manage risk better.
Give us some examples. How are they actually using AI?
Well, they have AI-powered chatbots for 247 customer support, answering queries, resolving issues, even guiding customers through complex transactions. They're also using AI algorithms to analyze tons of data to detect fraud, assess creditworthiness, and personalize product recommendations.
AI is woven into everything they do. But let's be real, AI raises ethical concerns too. What are they doing to ensure responsible AI development and use? Are they addressing issues like bias, transparency, and accountability?
Those are important considerations, and it seems they're approaching AI development cautiously and ethically. They're focused on building AI systems that are fair, transparent, and accountable. They're also consulting with experts and participating in industry discussions on responsible AI governance.
So they're thinking through the implications, making sure AI is used for good. But let's not forget the human side of things. Banking is about people and their financial well-being. How does Kotak Mahindra ensure that their digital transformation doesn't leave anyone behind? What about those who may not be comfortable with technology or have access to digital devices?
They're aware of that and are working to bridge the digital divide. They're keeping their branch network, offering phone banking, and providing personalized support for those who need help with digital channels.
So it's a multi-pronged approach, combining technology with a human touch.
Right, making sure everyone has access to the financial tools and resources they need.
This deep dive has shown us how Kotak Mahindra is more than just a financial institution. They reflect India's economic and social landscape. Their growth mirrors the nation's aspirations. Their challenges reflect the complexities of our changing world, and their commitment to social good aligns with the values of a nation striving for inclusive progress.
It's a fascinating perspective. It highlights the interconnectedness of business, society, and the human experience.
But let's zoom out one last time and consider the global context. We talked about a potential global economic slowdown, but what about other geopolitical risks? How are events on the world stage, like political instability, trade wars, and climate change, potentially affecting Kotak Mahindra?
Those are all factors they have to keep in mind. Geopolitical instability can disrupt supply chains, create uncertainty in financial markets, and shake investor confidence. Trade wars can lead to higher tariffs and trade barriers, which could impact their international operations. And climate change brings its own set of risks, from physical damage to their assets to reputational risks from financing unsustainable industries.
So they're operating in a world where events on the other side of the globe can have a ripple effect.
Exactly, and they need strong risk management strategies to handle those potential threats.
Okay, let's shift gears again and consider the changing regulatory landscape. We discussed the RBI's influence on Indian banking, but what about global regulatory trends? Are there any international regulations or frameworks that could affect Kotak Mahindra, especially their international business?
That's an important area to keep an eye on. Global regulations, like those for anti-money laundering, data privacy, and cybersecurity, are getting stricter, and they can be very different from country to country.
So they have to navigate a whole maze of rules and regulations.
Precisely. And it takes a deep understanding of global regulatory frameworks and a solid compliance system to make sure they're ticking all the boxes.
Let's bring it back to the customer. We talked about Kotak Mahindra's digital transformation, but how are these innovations actually affecting the customer experience? Are they making banking easier, more convenient, more personalized?
That's the goal, right. And they're making real progress in improving the customer experience through digital channels. Their mobile banking app, for example, is packed with features, from managing accounts and paying bills to tracking investments and getting personalized financial advice.
Banking at your fingertips. But what about those who aren't tech-savvy or lack access to digital devices? Are they being left behind?
They're trying to bridge that digital divide. They're keeping their branches open, offering phone banking, and providing support for those who need help with digital channels.
Creating a truly inclusive banking experience.
Right. Recognizing that technology should empower everyone, not create barriers.
This deep dive has been quite a journey. We've covered their financials, strategies, competitive landscape, risk management, sustainability, financial inclusion, global aspirations, corporate culture, and even their ethics and governance. It's been eye-opening.
Definitely. It shows how the world of finance is much more complex and nuanced than it might seem at first glance. It's not just about numbers and transactions. It's about people, relationships, and the impact on society.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Kotak Mahindra Bank, what's the main takeaway for our listeners? What's the one thing they should remember about this financial powerhouse?
I think the key takeaway is that Kotak Mahindra is more than just a profit-driven company. They're working to create value for everyone involved, drive positive social impact, and contribute to India's growth while navigating a complex and rapidly changing world.
It's an inspiring story, and it's a reminder that businesses can be a force for good.
Absolutely, and that's a message worth spreading.
It's amazing to think how much banking has already changed, and how much more it'll change in the years to come. But with all this talk about tech and global trends, it's easy to forget about the people involved. What's it actually like to work at Kotak Mahindra? What's their culture like?
That's a great question, and it often gets overlooked. A company's culture is so important. It really shapes everything, decisions, how employees are treated, how they interact with the world.
Yeah, for sure. So what's the vibe like at Kotak Mahindra? Is it super competitive, cutthroat, or is it more collaborative and supportive?
Well, from what I've heard, it's demanding but rewarding. They have high standards, yeah, but they also invest in their employees, give them opportunities to grow.
So you could challenge yourself, develop professionally, but what about work-life balance? Is that something they care about?
Work-life balance is huge these days, and it seems like Kotak Mahindra is making an effort to create a more balanced environment. They offer flexible work arrangements, have well-being initiatives, and promote a culture of respect and inclusivity.
That's great to hear. A happy workforce is a productive workforce, right?
Exactly, and it helps attract and keep the best talent.
Now let's talk about something that's always a big deal in banking. Risk. We've talked about economic downturns, cybersecurity threats, all that. But what about ethical risks? How do they make sure their employees are making responsible, ethical decisions, especially when handling people's money?
That's a critical question, and Kotak Mahindra takes it seriously. They have a very thorough code of conduct that lays out their ethical principles. It covers everything: conflicts of interest, bribery, data privacy, responsible lending, you name it.
So the rules are there, but how do they make sure people actually follow them? Is it just about having a code, or is there more to it?
They have a whole compliance team dedicated to monitoring and enforcing those standards. They also have regular training for employees on ethical conduct. Plus, there are whistleblowing mechanisms so people can report violations without fear of getting in trouble.
So they're creating a culture of accountability and transparency. That's good to know.
It is. And it goes beyond just following the rules. It's about making morally sound decisions, even when it's tough.
Absolutely. So how do they encourage that kind of ethical decision making?
That's where leadership comes in. The tone at the top sets the example for the entire organization. And from what I've seen, Kotak Mahindra's leadership really emphasizes ethical behavior and social responsibility.
So it's not just about profits, it's about doing the right thing. Even the most ethical companies can slip up sometimes.
hmm
So how do they handle it when things go wrong? Do they try to hide it, or do they own up to their mistakes?
Transparency and accountability are crucial in those situations, and they've shown a willingness to acknowledge mistakes, take action to fix things, and be open with everyone involved.
That's how you build trust and keep a good reputation. In finance, reputation is everything.
You're absolutely right, and Kotak Mahindra seems to get that.
We've covered a lot of ground today: financials, strategies, competition, risk management, sustainability, financial inclusion, global ambitions, culture, ethics, governance. It's been quite a journey.
I agree. It just shows how complex and multifaceted the financial world really is. It's not just about numbers, it's about people, relationships, and the impact we have on each other and the world.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Kotak Mahindra Bank,
Yeah.
what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What should they remember about this company?
I think the main takeaway is that Kotak Mahindra is more than just a company chasing profits. They're creating value for everyone involved, trying to make a positive difference, and contributing to India's growth in a complex, ever-changing world.
That's a really inspiring message, and it's a good reminder that business can be a force for good.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Kotak Mahindra Bank. We hope you've enjoyed it and learned something new along the way. Remember, the financial world is always changing, so stay curious, keep learning, and join us again for our next deep dive.